My name is Erica Lorraine Spencer, and I remain subject to state surveillance and terrorism by the state of California that is operating a malicious targeting system, which is referred to as federal group stalking and monitoring via communication devices. And it is in violation of federal stalking statute 18 U.S.C. sections 2261A subsections 1 and 2. My website and podcast serve the public good by publishing evidence of the public entity's ceaseless engagement in a pattern of conduct intended to stalk and monitor via communication devices, surveil, harass, and terrorize an American citizen in concert with the people of the state of California. Documentation serves the lawful purposes of wide exposure, federal prosecution, and influencing federal legislation with policies specifically designed to punish, dismantle, and disincentivize an unprecedented targeting system by a public entity that acts in concert with the people of the state in order to criminally place under surveillance and terrorize an American citizen, which is a matter of public corruption in the state of California.
Alrighty, it is still Wednesday, March 26, 2025, and I want to include in the documentation much of which I have documented, and it is for my own protection. I am the only person that initiated an investigation with regard to criminal conduct that the government was engaging in against me. And like in the letter that I created and sought to access the media with in 2018. It is referred to as the November 16th, 2018 letter to the media, I believe, and it is already published online regarding my efforts to independently seek public exposure as a means of enforcing my rights, of exposing what I'm subject to, as I'm essentially being kept concealed in a bubble and being targeted by the state. What do you do when the police are the ones that you would ordinarily report criminal activity about, and the police are the ones that are engaging in the criminal activity? Now that is quite a circumstance, and it's not just the police. You can't report it to any sort of agency. Okay, you can't just report, you can't go to like a women's shelter, something like Mercy House. I've documented them gang stalking me with the police. You can't report it to any sort of agency online. I'm subject to monitoring online. And you have what is disinterest. You have the inability to get through, to communicate, to understand, to appreciate what it is that you're trying to convey with apparently services that they're routinely engaged in, but not to the targeted individual who is indeed known. And you will not get any sort of assistance from that. This is the entity that is under all circumstances targeting you and removing any ability for you to report or enforce your rights against it. And so that's what's so important about publication, because as I've also documented, the courts are not any place where you can seek redress for grievances, as I have sought to enforce my rights. And it wasn't for naught, because that was documentation speaking to the corruption of the courts, meaning when I am granted justice that I am fully entitled to, and that I unilaterally have proven that I'm entitled to, it will not be that the state could claim, well, the plaintiff, or like myself, the targeted individual, however you want to refer to me, the targeted individual did not resort to the courts to give the state an opportunity to provide redress. They weren't given an ability to address the concerns of the targeted individual. The state doesn't have that as an argument. The state doesn't have that as the circumstance. The state knows very well the ways in which it sought to first obstruct justice by evading service of process. The same San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department that you have seen gang stalking, even here at Woodside, going to that extent to stalk me and monitor me and communicate a threat that they're stalking and monitoring by coming to the venue. And you know that they're stalking me because they're doing it under the fake sun. They're doing it amongst engineered light. They're doing it in concert with these clearly identified gang stalkers at the venue. And so that's how important it is for the entity to continuously target me. That's the same entity that worked with the corrupt gang stalking court to evade service of process, which is where the corrupt courts that are nothing other than state facilitating venues, where you are not going to get any sort of redress, which is an unconstitutional violation of your rights. Not only is the government gang stalking, targeting you, engaging in criminal activity against you, the government has removed the ability to enforce your rights and expose that. And so by exposing it, by prosecuting the government, you can't prosecute the government that's gang stalking you, because the government that's gang stalking you is doing so in the courts and will engage in what is violating your rights, even in violating the rules of the court and policies and procedures that would enable you to prosecute a case against the state. All right. The state is inevitably biased, and I've documented this. It's a matter of court documentation. Not only did the entity evade service of process, which is a criminal act of obstruction of justice, it's not just some sort of civil matter, some administrative matter. It's a criminal act of obstruction of justice. And I even went to the extent documenting gang stalking at the gang stalking courthouse, where they evaded service of process, replete with helicopter over my head, fake sun over the top of my head. Okay, San Bernardino Police Department gang stalking. This is at the San Bernardino courthouse. These are things that are already sitting on the record. Where this entity has engaged in that level of terrorizing an American citizen who cannot seek any shelter of protection with regard to that state. So that is speaking to corruption at every angle, at every corner, at every turn. And that is terrorism in and of itself. Apart from what is the terrorism with regard to the actual execution of the pattern of conduct. Okay. It is also terrorism when you cannot get justice from any place or anyone. All right. And that is a matter of what is fact that is documented for prosecution. The entity is engaging in this pattern of conduct. And while doing so, I have documented the gang stalking courts that have not only engaged in evasion of service of process, but they have furthermore engaged in what is theft of my vehicle. That was theft of personal property. That was the same gang stalking Ontario Police Department, who knew very well that there was no abandonment of my vehicle. They were gang stalking me in my vehicle day and night. They are the ones that removed my license plates. They are the ones that removed my VIN number. And they did so when they are the ones that kidnapped me. The same exact entity. And that same entity then engaged in what is denying me justice, which is a default judgment, because the people of the state thought that they were just going to ignore my civil case for conversion after they stole my car pursuant to color of authority by a gang stalking police department. These are criminal acts by the state, who then at the gang stalking courthouses deny justice, deny what you are legally entitled to, which is a criminal act. It's not the discretion of any judge. All right. And it's not the legitimate practice of law by any participating attorneys and judges. It is the entity gang stalking in the courthouses. And this is the same entity that engaged in what is theft of my vehicle pursuant to what is my bringing a civil suit against the state of California, enforcing my rights, which is a means of prosecuting the state, documenting the state. All right. And how comprehensively corrupt it is at every level. The entity not only engaged in evasion of service of process, the entity stole my vehicle. The entity then denies me a default judgment after the people of the state, because Bill and Wags is not a private third party, not a private actor. They're a third party. They're gang stalking. I also documented them gang stalking, but I want to be clear. The people of the state are all gang stalking, but the evidence even includes that particular third party gang stalking me specifically. But the pattern of conduct surrounds them, and then you're giving greater context regarding what it is that I've documented in the courts. Speaking to the totality, the comprehensive nature of corruption that I am subject to, that the American citizen is subject to, who is subject to federal group stalking, monitoring, gang stalking, criminal surveillance, targeting by the state. That's the state that is targeting you in furtherance of ultimately killing you, controlling the narrative after they kill you, stealing from you, kidnapping you, and controlling the narrative while they do so. Okay. And the purpose of gang stalking in particular is to psychologically torture to the point that you lose your mind in one way or another, or they merely just falsely depict you as one who has lost your mind. And that's what the entity sought to commit against me by gang stalking me. Okay. And it is, again, speaking to what requires is that state laws change, because I represent how it does not create actual mental illness, and it is a criminal act to create some sort of illusion of mental illness while the entity is engaging in what is a targeting system that is psychologically harmful, that is not creating what is actual mental illness. That is what would be accurately and more precisely defined as a complex and fragile human being and any person that can react differently, a plethora of different ways that a human being can react to this sort of targeting system. And that is not accurately defined as mental illness, especially not in the ways that the entity likes to depict and define mental illness, so that you can be kept in a mental facility for the rest of your life after they targeted you to get that unlawful result. All right. But nonetheless, this is the entity that engaged in invasion of service of process, then theft of my vehicle as a retaliatory act after I am bringing suit against the state that it avoided, and then denying default judgment. This is when the entity is engaging in what is then a kidnapping, a pattern of conduct of kidnapping in 2019, in 2020, in 2021, and in 2022. So I want to be clear, the entity is engaging in the pattern of conduct, and right now, 8:21 a.m., RGS is indeed engaged in gang stalking, and so on a cloudy day, as opposed to engineered light sweeping across the ceiling, it's tremendous amplified audible activity. And these are demons and gang stalking immigrants who do not learn their lesson. They will be prosecuted along with the entity that's remaining at the venue. They're monitoring while I am speaking to evidence that they do not want me to speak about, and the demon possessed who are severely mentally ill are still engaging in this narcissistic behavior in terms that you would understand, I guess, that you're accustomed to, rather, that are more popular. But these are demons and seeking to control with amplified audible activity, and it's not controlling anything. It's speaking to why immigrants are subject to deportation. It's speaking to why gang stalkers are subject to mental asylums. It's speaking to why the gang stalking entity is subject to federal prison. It's speaking to why gang stalking third parties like RGS and Avanath are going to be subject to both a civil and a criminal prosecution. Okay. But nonetheless, the entity is doing so while the mental health patient is pacing above in unit 55 at 8:22 in the morning, not sleeping, not employed either, is 55 plus and is very energetic with regard to psychopathic pacing in concert with amplified banging that's heard inside of the unit, while engineered light that is of a gray hue is sitting on the living room wall. That's the pattern of conduct with regard to light, relevant positioning, and audible activity that's amplified, coming from both outside and inside. Okay, this is speaking to the pattern of conduct that Tracy Banks, somebody that has the aid of the corrupt government. And that is what I am getting to while the entity is currently gang stalking me. And this is something that the federal government is inextricably linked to, and the federal government is therefore liable for it. As I am someone that is representing an exception, I am somebody that, as that exception, and speaking on behalf of what is any American citizen that should never be subject to this and should never be subject to what is the ongoing continuation of it while the federal government is sitting and watching. That is the federal government that's sitting around watching is the federal government that's engaged in federal group stalking and monitoring and facilitation of federal group stalking and monitoring. And this is why you have what are emboldened immigrants gang stalking right in the face of the federal government, when you're both speaking to what is worthy of deportation, and yet you have this oxymoron. Why would somebody that is facing deportation be so fearless in the face of that sort of very serious repercussion? And that is because the entity essentially has the blessing of the federal government, which is corrupt, where it is gang stalking, even by sitting back and permitting it to occur. This is what is happening while the entity is engaged in federal group stalking and monitoring, as the state is acting directly and the state is acting also vicariously. You're watching the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, the Ontario Fire Department, and you've been watching the Ontario Police Department in the city of Ontario engage in, and the you saw American Medical Response the other day as well, engaging. Those are state actors acting directly at the facilitating venue. They are still acting right now while the entity is acting vicariously. And this is something that the federal government is engaged in. Indeed, the federal government that is speaking to demon possession, this is speaking to demon possession that is the cause of what is corruption, and it's not limited to the state level. The federal government that is sitting back and permitting an American citizen, anyone, including myself, to remain subject to this criminal system is a federal government that is compromised. And I want to make sure that I include this into the documentation, because I remain unbiased with regard to who is practicing that which is wicked and who is practicing that which is unlawful, that which is corrupt. Okay, and that which taints and compromises that particular level of government or agency. And so you have what is the quote unquote federal government at the federal level that is engaged in and is knowledgeable about the pattern of conduct, but you have a complex and conflicting set of circumstances, which includes while the entity is gang stalking me and the federal government is engaged in what is gang stalking by sitting back and permitting it another day, another hour, aware of my documentation, aware of what it is that I'm publishing online. However, my documentation online gets little to no attention, and that is deliberate as well. Okay, on YouTube, my YouTube channel, and this was the case also before in 2020. I started publishing my documentation in 2019, 2020, and I took my documentation offline after I was released from kidnapping in January of 2023, and I did so, and the entity is under the impression again that the entity that's obsessively gang stalking me still, never ceased to engage in that. That's why LAPD picked up right where Ontario PD left off, gang stalking day and night in helicopter in a manner that was directly threatening me. That is like right in your face by flying over your head, flying in circles over me, flying in circles outside of my apartment, amplifying it. This is what the entity began doing to communicate a very direct threat. And the entity and LAPD, an entirely different region, an entirely different agency, right? However, the same entity, the same pattern of conduct in the same specific environment, but is not the same exact natural environment. You wouldn't have the same zenith of the sun. You would never have the sun rising and setting at one apartment complex. But that supernatural phenomenon is what is shared, and it's the identification of that criminal pattern of conduct. And while I remain subject to the pattern of conduct today, it is something that the federal government is both aware of, and while the federal government is very much engaged in and interested in keeping me in a bubble, okay? And by this bubble is a threat. It's a threat. It's a potent threat to my life, my safety, my well-being, and my liberty. While the federal government is sitting back and watching the sheriff's department, who are bearing guns, they're bearing weapons, and they're engaged in federal group stalking monitor. They're watching the Ontario Police Department, who are bearing weapons, gang stalking, using things as incredible as helicopters. While they are gang stalking one person, there's no question regarding who the entity and the federal government is aware of this and is sitting around and watching it. I want to be clear. It's not only the fact of the gang stalking, it's the psychological torture that the federal government is permitting to continue. I want to be clear with regard to the harms that the federal government is engaging in, is sharing in, and is permitting to go on. While they're in real-time knowledge of evidence that I have that's not just speaking to speculating about what may be happening, I have the unique and very specific circumstance of having actually proven what is monitoring, what is gang stalking as it's ordinarily referred to, and I have literally put it embodied it in a whole body of evidence in order for anybody to understand it and recognize it, in order for me also to prosecute it. This is something that is, again, extraordinary. All right. And this is something that is providing at the very basic level probable cause for the federal government with regard to what it has jurisdiction on more than one grounds, but it does include public corruption. And the entity that is engaging in the pattern of conduct of federal group stalking and monitoring is doing so with the engagement of what is the federal government. All right. And the federal government is engaging in it while it is sitting around permitting it. And the federal government is engaged in and is interested also in what is compromising my safety and my life and my well-being, because this is psychological torture that they are in real time. While I'm documenting it, the federal government's engaging in this. So while I'm talking about engineered light, while I'm talking about gang stalking immigrants, while I'm talking about a population and gang stalking property management company and gang stalking residents, psychopaths, pacing and the federal government is targeting with the state. And this is speaking to my ability and my rights and any American citizen's right to enforce against the federal government. And this is speaking to what is corruption. That is not merely, as I am shown, what the entity is doing is dictating where the evidence goes, like you would do with any fact-focused, dispassionate investigation of any entity where you remain unbiased. What the entity is committing, that's where the evidence is going. The federal government is sitting around permitting it and is engaging in it. Okay, so the question is why? But with regard to the fact that I remain subject to it, you're talking about what is coexisting with remaining subject to this pattern of conduct and having the body of evidence that I have produced, which no person has ever done, No person has ever provided what is hard evidence in the ways in which that I have. And no person has ever spoken to what is being clearly entitled to justice, even in a court of law. And at this juncture, in that, and at this place with regard to the evidence and what the federal government that's sitting around watching and is watching a population engage in, they are not ignorant about what the state is actually doing. And so I'm stating not only is the federal government watching, the federal government is a part of it while it's permitting it to occur. And I want to be clear, understand what is going on. This is spiritual. This is speaking to the demon possessed who are inevitably a part of what is the federal level, where they're permitting. These spirits are on the same team, if you will. They are associated with each other. They are in agreement while I am remaining subject to this pattern of conduct. And that is also the case. I've spoken to the entity that has sexual relationship with Tracy Banks, has personal relationships, connections that she has within the government. And these are people that are a part of the government that aided in her targeting me, that aided in the state targeting me, using resources of the government, like corrupt courthouses. That's where you have corrupt judges. That's where you have corrupt attorneys engaging in ridiculous things such as a power of attorney over someone like myself. And as I have spoken to and articulated and legally represented, as I'm documenting, I am representing the ordinary target individual. It is also with regard to ridiculous power of attorney over any ordinary target individual, because they're gang stalking while they're seeking to criminally defame you in a corrupt court of law. They're corrupt by virtue of federal group stalking and monitoring. That's not coincidental. That's how the pattern of conduct is executed. This is what the federal government is aware of and what the federal government is engaged in. And you need to know that this is speaking to a spirit that is not limited to the state level. This is relevant with regard to justice. This is relevant with regard to exposing corruption. And I'm not going to not speak to it because the federal government is necessary in order to intrude upon what the state is continuously being permitted to engage in. It does require the federal involvement, but it's going to require those who have not already been compromised by Satan, who will not find some way to facilitate the state's engagement in the P.O.C. And the federal government is keeping a bubble. And by a bubble, remember, I'm referencing the courts and the criminal conduct committed by the courts because publication of evidence is crucial with regard to the prosecution, to the exposure. You don't get to the prosecution without the exposure. You don't get to exposure without publication on the internet. The internet is a crucial aspect of the pattern of conduct, but don't forget, not only is it crucial with regard to exposing the pattern of conduct, it's a venue where the pattern of conduct is underway. This is where you're getting to federal stalking, surveillance online, and where you're talking about who are third parties such as YouTube. And the fact pattern of federal group stalking and monitoring is speaking to what is an intentional act of keeping me in a bubble. And that is the evidence that I'm subject to this pattern of conduct by getting little to no exposure online. That is not a coincidence or an accident either. This is deliberate with regard to keeping me in a bubble, keeping the fact that I'm being gang stalked, keeping the fact that I'm being subject to ongoing ceaseless psychological torture a secret, keeping it concealed, suppressing what is with regard to the prosecution of that corrupt entity, suppressing evidence. And why am I being gang stalked? You're suppressing evidence. You're keeping me in a bubble with the blessing of the federal government, the engagement by the federal government in furtherance of committing murder and kidnapping. So under the circumstances of gang stalking that's designed to cause someone to literally come apart at the seams, to literally break down a human being, were I to react in such a way, this is not going to happen, but you're understanding what is the threat posed. I remain subject to and entitled to enforce my rights. And I'm also going to speak to corruption. And I'm also going to speak to where the spirit of Satan is in operation. And this is persisting at a federal level. The federal government has not interfered with what the state has committed. The state was supposed to get the job done. The state has not gotten the job done. The level of evidence has included what is the federal government, not just by gang stalking with sex partners of Tracy Banks who are in government, but those that are engaged in, aware of what it is that I've published online, but yet they are holding back and not interfering and stopping what is psychological torture, that is inhumane and unconstitutional criminal conduct that the government is in real time right now committing while the federal government is watching it. That is very sick and disturbing. But it's coexisting with what is keeping me and my evidence of it that proves it, by the way, to a legal standard beyond a reasonable doubt, a secret, suppressing it. That's not a coincidental combination of circumstances either. This is very deliberate with regard to concealing what I remain subject to, and also continuously keeping me subject to it. And under circumstances with regard to the ordinary targeted individual, were that American citizen that is whose evidence is being concealed, who is remaining subject to it while the federal government is aware of it and is keeping that suppressed, and in other words, not interfering and not delivering justice, is not interfering with what is public corruption, one basis whereby the federal government has jurisdiction. You're talking about what is that same entity that controls the narrative with regard to the whole purpose of gang stalking in the first place. So you're talking about what is the federal government that is not providing justice, that is not doing its job and stopping that violence against an American citizen, that violence that is inhumane, and it is unconstitutional, but it is inhumane. And this is something that the federal government is sponsoring because the federal government is not ignorant and the federal government has not stopped it. And at the same time, my documentation, which is evidence, is deliberately being suppressed. You don't have that combination coincidentally, like I said, and it's not something that is happening with regard to accidentally with regard to federal stalking. I've already let you know, and the evidence and the entities engaging the P.O.C. with regard to federal stalking surveillance is online. And third parties, I'm on a third party platform where I am being targeted via suppression of my content. And at the same time that my content is getting little to no views, that is the evidence that the entity is currently psychologically torturing me on a ceaseless basis, trying to murder me in secret, trying to defame me through corruption of the government with an entirely corrupt civilian population. That is the state of California. You have what is a quote unquote audience that is online creating content. It's creating content that's speaking to what is a very specific and unique circumstance that I alone, and I can conclusively state that, I alone am experiencing. No one has ever prosecuted any case. I did my research before I undertook the Herculean feat, if you will, the impossible, which again, Christ Jesus is the one that's giving me the insight and the divine knowledge to prosecute demons that are engaging in criminal conduct. So you're talking about what is a unique and never before occurrence. This has never happened before with regard to prosecuting a public entity that's engaged in what is referred to as gang stalking. This has always been established and spoken of as an unsubstantiated conspiracy. Okay, typically asserted and spoken of by those who are suffering some sort of mental illness. I want to be clear, that's literally the narrative, the purpose of the P.O.C. And anyone that speaks of the gang stalking, they are always immediately associated with mental illness. Again, the whole purpose of deliberately crafted, vague and unconstitutional legislation exists for the purpose of criminally defaming American citizens. And it is literally given what is the impetus, in other words, is the ordinary conversations, the ordinary position of who are the people of the state, and also ignorant people that should not speak on things that they know not about, they know nothing of, speaking to defaming, which is essentially you are defaming. It's not free speech where the pattern of conduct is underway and you're on the venue of the internet where surveillance is underway. And with regard to under the facts where I'm speaking to, you have what is content that's being created about what is a very specific and unique circumstance that has never before existed. People that are being gang stalked are not proving it. They're not publishing evidence about it. No one has ever thought of this as a tactic or a method. No one has ever done what I've done before, period. No one has ever done it. And you have people that are online publishing content that is very specific and unique with regard to something that apparently no one knows about because my content is getting no views and no attention. Now you have, again, what are these conflicting circumstances? And again, the content online is speaking to what is an audience. And these are even people that I'm going to go to that consider themselves and call themselves, they refer to themselves as Christians. Now, I want to be clear, what is my circumstance? I do not have any ability to know what my neighbors are doing online. I'm no audience of anyone else's life and circumstances and what they're going through. I'm not creating content about what I know someone else is experiencing, and even like I'm giving insight and like I can advise that person when I've never even been through it. But you're sitting back watching like an audience and then creating content that they are seeking likes and subscribes for, while someone is literally living in real time suffering. Someone is literally going through that pattern of conduct that is unfathomable, that has also never even been treated as a reality, while they are at the same time being watched by the federal government while they're being targeted by the state. And that is the federal government engaging in the pattern of conduct. You're not different. You're engaging in it while you're sitting there watching it. You're not interfering. You're not stopping it. You are engaged in that pattern of conduct, period. You're a facilitator. You're engaging in what is suppressing evidence. It's not a coincidence that my evidence that is published online and is quite spectacular. It is. I have very damning evidence, and no one has ever thought of how to expose it and literally prove it. Keeping my composure, literally prosecuting in every single last one of my videos, legally analyzing what the entity is doing, prosecuting video by video by video. Okay, the entity is doing so while they are intentionally keeping me in a bubble and is in real time. The mental health patient is stomping above in the living room. These are psychopaths that are stalking with scraping on the sidewalk outside, surrounding by the demon-possessed mental health patients. And the federal government is permitting this sort of threat to the life of an American citizen. They're gang stalking in real time. The government's still paying their rent. They're still collecting paychecks while they're gang stalking for RGS and Avanath. They're still gang stalking coming onto the grounds, and this is what the government is sponsoring, while simultaneously keeping a target individual like myself in a bubble and also not interfering and stopping it. And this is, again, occurring for a reason. They have a purpose for engaging in this. This is supposed to result in what is a murder. This is supposed to result in what is defamation of a criminal nature. They want to falsely depict the character of the one whom they're keeping in a bubble, whom they're watching like an audience, creating content about the targeted individual while not naming them. And like you're speaking to a whole audience of people that have a similar circumstance. No one else has ever created any content, and you don't know about it because no one is looking at my videos. I get 0 to no views. So pray tell, is it that you're creating content about? And it is not helping when you are sitting back watching like you're engaged in voyeurism. That's not like that is what voyeurism is. And that's what demons do. I am not in that circumstance watching anyone else's life. Unlike these demons, unlike those who are aware of and engaging in this system of surveillance, and they're also profiting from it. That's what profiting is. You're making YouTube videos. They're getting likes and views. You get paid. They monetize their videos. They're making money off of gang stalking. And there is one person that has ever prosecuted and exposed it, what is monitoring, defined it, described it, documented it in order to prosecute it, and also inform in order that other people would know what it is that you are subject to, surveillance. And it is satanic in nature. And I am subject to surveillance as well. And the entity has tried to, and is still in real time seeking to defame and murder me. And doing so with the aid and involvement of the federal government at this level, who is not ignorant. The federal government is present. The federal government knows. There are federal agents that have relationship and have aided Tracy Banks, okay, who this is a high school graduate, okay, this is somebody that is under no circumstances at all any sort of intricate thinker, okay, you're talking about just creative with regard to how maniacal, how malicious, how deceptive, okay, but with regard to intellect, with regard to actual ability, this is not someone that is in any way an actual formidable adversary in the spirit or actually any sort of competition. This is, and I'm not competing, I'm prosecuting, but I want to be clear, this is, again, I'm dealing with demons who are sitting back and watching like it's a movie. While these are demons that are going against myself, who is a believer in Christ. Understand how sick this is on a spiritual level. And then with regard to the criminal conduct, sitting back and watching it to see who's going to be victorious, if you will. And so if the targeted individual actually has a mental breakdown, the state's criminal defamation, that narrative is what carries out through the day. Oh, well, they were crazy from the beginning. That's what Tracy Banks in the state of California has been establishing on paper. If they accomplish what is a murder, or if the target individual takes their own life, well, this is what the entity has been stating has been the case and has been the threat from the beginning. And so understand the threat that the federal government is now responsible for, and knowingly and intentionally, because you're not ignorantly or just coincidentally suppressing my evidence. And that is a suppression. The fact that none of my evidence, as spectacular as it is, as wealthy as it is, there's years of evidence that no one is noticing online, while I remain subject to it at the same time. And the government is engaged in directly and coming around and stalking me. Like they're coming onto the grounds of Woodside Senior Apartments to participate in it. While the federal government is sitting and watching, it doesn't get any more blatant and clear than that. And so I want to make sure that that is understood with regard to the unlawful threat that is posed to my life in real time, including by the federal government. And I also want to be clear that with regard to justice, that I am nonetheless entitled to. I understand how this ends, but I want to make sure that the federal government is recognized for the ways in which it has unclean hands, for the ways in which it is compromised and is incompetent, having relationship at any level with Tracy Banks, who is a terrorist. She's a criminal. And she relies on the corruption of the government, who has aided in trying to murder me and defame me. And she does so with everyone else, including the people of the state, gang stalking, but everyone that's in my so-called family, everyone that I'm related to, and everyone that I knew, socially speaking. Okay. I have been gang stalked at every institution of higher education. I've been gang stalked at every place of employment. I've been gang stalked at every place of residence. I've been gang stalked every place that I go to, for the grocery store, the mall, even while I'm traveling. And my documentation establishes that and shows that. Okay. The entity is gang stalking on a cloudy day with engineer light at 8:46 a.m. And the gang stalkers who you see close-up images of RGS, they're going to mental asylums for it. And you already know what's happening to the defendants of Avanath at Woodside Senior Apartments. That is speaking to, again, while the federal government is sitting around and engaging in psychological torture with the state, while simultaneously keeping myself, while subject to that inhumanity and subject to that unconstitutional and criminal conduct by the government, that is the federal government that's engaging in it in real time. I am speaking to the federal government that is engaging in it in real time as I point that out. And I want to make sure that the federal government is understood to be one who is hostile to my exposing it, while I'm subject to such demonic acts of retaliation, such as engineer light moving across the patio glass door. Sitting around and watching an American citizen engage in the pattern of conduct is speaking to what is an act of incompetence. That's exactly what the federal government is supposed to do. Not sit around and watch, not sit around and encourage an audience, not sit around and have worthless YouTube content that's not helping. In fact, you're not, no one is looking for an applause. No one is looking for an audience. I have been very clear that I am prosecuting. While an entity is trying to murder me and defame me, I am prosecuting it. And exposure is an integral aspect to that. It is key. In fact, there is no other way to enforce your own rights where the government is the criminal. And the government has been aided by the federal government in suppressing that evidence, while it is in real time to date at 8:48 a.m. still engaging in psychological torture and is gang stalking in furtherance of murder and defamation in the face of the wealth of evidence that I have. Okay, so I want to speak to what is inherently corrupt and what is speaking to the unclean hands at the federal level. This is speaking to what is incompetence, and I'm not going to hold my tongue because the federal government is necessary in order to even get to a point to where you can even enforce your rights. But I will expose it. I will expose it, and that's what I'm going to continue to do, because as I'm documenting the state, as the gang stalking police, the fire departments and ambulances and sheriff's departments and the population itself, businesses, Amazon Prime, Uber Eats, a Walmart, every other gang stalking third party, while they're gang stalking, it's speaking to the federal government that is engaging and is knowledgeable about it. Okay. And so with regard to that, this is an entity, and this is perhaps why it's permitted. I'm not going to question. I have been, again, entirely unbiased. If you are corrupt, if you serve Satan, I'm going to call it out. period. And what the audience on YouTube is engaging in, it is a form of voyeurism. It is something that I find to be very peculiar, how you have information about what a targeted individual is subject to, but yet there is no attention given online where that exposure is necessary in order to get justice. No one is asking for an applause. I'm asking for justice. I'm demanding justice. In fact, I had to do the job of the federal government. I had to do it by myself. And I still am doing it by myself while I'm calling out the federal government who's permitting psychological torture. And it's the same one that's supposed to be trusted to put criminals in prison. And there are those that are at the federal level who belong in prison. They belong in prison. Where they've engaged in the pattern of conduct, having sex with the witch, Tracy Banks, that's speaking to what is unclean hands, that's speaking to engagement at any level with regard to targeting me. She has sex with those who she's recruiting. They have sex with those who they're going to do favors for. Engaging in what is gang stalking, falsely depicting my character, engaging in any sort of facilitation where I've been accused of crimes that I never committed. I'm being put on lists where the government has some sort of superficial means, some veneer whereby you're able to keep me under surveillance. That's gang stalking by admission. All right. And the entity that has any personal relation, understand the relationships with Tracy Banks is leading to a recognition of defendants. The relationships of with Tracy Banks. OK, so the entity is gang stalking, and the relationship of the neighbors, the relationships of those that are in relevant positions, those are relationships as well. But I'm talking about the personal relationships, and they are those who are in government. All right. So I want to make sure that that is abundantly clear, because I have to make sure that every angle of what is a very sick system that I am subject to and that I am experiencing and I'm observing, and I find it to be disgusting, actually. There is no way that I would, as an outsider, watch another person. I would never just sit and watch someone go through this and not do anything, not report it. And I understand that there are people who are cowards. And if you're a coward, then don't sit around watching. It's very sick if you're not going to do anything, but you're sitting there and watching. And you need to understand, with regard to the spirit that is at play, you are the same spirit. If you think you're different, you're not. Okay, so the entity that is sitting and engaging in monitoring on the venue of the internet, I've already spoken to, you are the internet is nothing other than a venue where surveillance remains underway. And this is the case with regard to the byproduct of monitoring and suppression of my evidence. That's both not getting any views, that's speaking to no exposure, that's speaking to concealing and keeping me in a bubble while simultaneously targeting me, and enabling that ability to continuously target me and keep that a secret until they can accomplish murder, until they can accomplish criminally defaming me, all right, and kidnapping. That's the purpose, and that's the unlawful threat. All right, the entity is engaging in this and is doing so with those, and I want to be clear, any of those that are of any sort of relationship with Tracy Banks, I have documented the people of the state. The entity, the people of the state, that is the general term. Every single last person that I've spoken to, a population, doesn't matter where I go, they're gang stalking. The P.O.C. has already established that. The people of the state, those whose name I know, every single last person that I have identified with regard to the people of the state, every person and every means of identifying their contact information, just as far as reporting them to the feds, those are the people of the state who pose a direct threat to my safety and my life. They are no friend. They are no provider of any sort of justice or information that I need from them. And I want to make that clear too. With regard to this so-called audience that's both sitting back and watching while someone is engaging in this sort of inhumanity and criminal conduct, and yet there's nobody that's coming in and providing any justice at the same time. And you have what are those who I know by name, who I intentionally ceased communication with, who have engaged in targeting me as I documented it, have any level of personal or sexual relationship with Tracy Banks or anyone else in my family. They represent a specific threat to my life and safety, and it is an unlawful threat for any of them to come into my presence. It is the threat by the Ontario Police Department, but we don't even have to use Ontario Police. Any gang stalking police department is a threat to your life and safety. That's a duh. I've shown you they're engaged in stalking me in things like helicopters, because that's how much demons want to feel powerful and big and mighty while they're targeting you and wanting you to experience psychological torture, hoping that you just kill yourself. Okay? Hoping that you just question your sanity and just go off on someone so that they can hurt you and have a reason to blame you for it. Hoping that they can take your life and state that you were threatening them while they were gang stalking you the whole time. The gang stalking police departments are a direct threat to my life, safety, my liberty, and my well-being. And it is the same with every single person that I have already documented as the people of the state. Everyone whose name I already know. None of them are representing anything but that. And none of them are welcome in my presence. That's why I protected myself and stopped communicating with them. This is the case for everyone that has any sort of position in government. And they were aiding Tracy Banks and targeting me in whatever way, at whatever level, through whatever means. There is no person that's of the government that I know by name, that is providing any sort of help to me, that is anything other than threatening my life and safety. And that's exactly how that is communicated. Expressly and impliedly. The entity that's engaging in what is gang stalking me is the entity that is still gang stalking me and is not providing any sort of justice or protection. I'm not going anywhere with anyone that is gang stalking me and anyone whose name I already know. You are kidnapping me. Okay, that's a kidnapping. So I'm not going of my own volition and consent. And I need to make sure that that's abundantly clear. This is an entity that's entirely corrupt. That is seeking to try to control a narrative even while they're surrounded by evidence. And so now the entity is just making sure they're suppressing my evidence and keeping me in that bubble. So I will make sure, and I vocalize now, while there is a population of people who are also on the venue of the internet, who are sitting around watching as well, while a human being is being suffering, and some of them even call themselves Christians. And I want to be clear, the Holy Spirit that is in me cannot stomach to do what they're doing. We do not have the same Holy Spirit. Okay. The entity is engaging in the pattern of conduct, and there is no person that I have clearly identified in the folder entitled The People of the State that I know by name that is any friend of mine that represents anything other than a threat to my life and safety. I will never voluntarily go with any person that I've already documented by name. I will never go anywhere voluntarily and of my own volition with any person that I've already documented by name who was a sex partner, Tracy Banks, who was formerly in my social circle, who was secretly married to my parental figure, Tracy Banks, had any sort of relationship behind my back. It's not going to happen, and it would not happen voluntarily on my part. It would be a kidnapping. Okay, there is nothing that's going to change my mind. I am totally disgusted by those who I have documented and reported to the best of my ability, their names, and the last time that I communicated with them, the latest contact information that I have about them. They are as threatening as this psychopath that's pacing above. They are still gang stalking. For any of those people of the state to come into my presence is a threat to my life. As surely as the entity is still psychologically harming me and is still targeting me with the blessing of the federal government. There is no person I've already identified by name that is doing anything other than threatening my life directly. And I would document that and enforce my rights against them, not go off anywhere with them. And I want to make sure that that's clear. This is what an entity is doing while they are intentionally concealing evidence that they know is in existence. This is speaking to the federal government that is not ignorant. And I want to be clear that I want to read some notes that I have because I want to make sure that I speak to every aspect with regard to the ongoing threat that is posed to my life and safety, while the federal government is not reasonably ignorant about that which it is suppressing and about that which it is watching and essentially engaging in while I remain subject to federal group stalking and monitoring at the same time. This is permitting an entity. This is an entity that is obsessively committed to seeking to target me and take my life, even while I've already proven the fact that they're engaging in that criminal conduct. This is an unprecedented instance of corruption and a determination, even while the demons have been defeated. Okay. And that's the character of Satan, by the way, Satan that loses. But Satan is not going to actually accomplish this. I'm going to vocalize every aspect of it because no one will be mistaken for some hero that they're not. No one's going to be mistaken for some partner or colleague that they are not, and they will never be. No one is going to be mistaken for somebody that is a friend when they are a foe. And you are a foe where you are sitting around watching. I would never sit around watching anyone suffer. I cannot stomach that. God didn't build me that way, and I harbor his Holy Spirit, and anyone that knows him, you don't delight in, and you don't sit around idle while another person is suffering unjustly. This is what monitoring spirits are doing. And I want to be clear, all the people of the state that I documented, these are demons. And they're still monitoring spirits. They are still spiritually attacking me. And they are in the physical wanting to represent themselves as something less than that. I'm going to be very clear with regard to the identity of the entity. I am only in the presence of Tracy Banks with regard to, but I'm in her presence. But I want to be clear, I'm documenting every moment of my being in her presence, which I am being gang stalked in her presence and in her apartment. She represents a direct threat to my life, and nobody having any relationship with her, nobody in any position working for any government agency having a relationship with her, helping her, gang stalking me, targeting me in any way is anything other than a threat to my life. And that's exactly what the facts are continuously proving and supporting. And that's also what is reasonably the case. I am also clearly capable, and I am demonstrating that I am fully aware of what it is that I will do and I will not do, what I'm willing to do, what I am not willing to do, what I want and what I do not want, and what I will never want. I will not do it. I am not suicidal. I would never threaten my own life by going into the presence or being around someone or communicating or associating with someone that has already demonstrated a desire to harm me in the ways in which the entity is targeting me. I would never do that, and I'm not going to. And the entity that comes into my presence where I've already documented them by name, and this is with regard to the feds that are actually providing justice, not the corrupted and compromised and incompetent aspects to the entity that is engaged in gang stalking and sitting around and watching. Those that are already compromised, they are not providing justice. They represent a threat. I'm not walking away anywhere with them, and that would be imprudent for the federal government to be in my presence with any such compromised actor. That is communicating a direct threat to my life. So I just want to make sure that that's abundantly clear. The entity is doing so while the unlawful suppression of evidence, which is, again, the unlawful suppression of evidence is that which is needed for exposure. That's critical to saving one's own life. And the entity is trying to muzzle that while simultaneously continuing it. All right. So I just want to be clear. Those that are engaged in that at any level that I've already documented by name, they remain that threat. And I want to make sure that that is abundantly clear. This is coexisting with the inexplicable ability for the civilian population that is on social media, speaking to what is a very specific and unique circumstance that is only belongs to me, because no one has ever exposed gang stalking and monitoring. No one has ever thought of what is publishing evidence of it online. No one has certainly ever exposed public corruption and prosecuting it. These are very specific details that are being spoken to on social media. So you're talking about what is very, very tailored with regard to these quote unquote messages. And at the same time, I'm getting no exposure on the venue of the internet. That is deliberate. And it is an unlawful threat, and it is relevant to the ways in which the entity that is currently gang stalking by those that have been granted a privilege to be here, and they're wearing RGS landscaping logos, beating on the walls outside, and gang stalking by residents pacing in the apartment above in Unit 55. These are demons who are gang stalking with the federal government. They're gang stalking with the feds. All right. I just want to make sure that that's abundantly clear. I have documented the people of the state by name. I will include the link in order for to easily access those who are documented by name, image, whatever I had with regard to reporting, because this represents the entity that I have no relation or association with, and I have no plan to in the future. The entity that is sitting back and watching this system persist is not one that is providing any sort of confidence with regard to actually having my best interests at heart. The entity that has already compromised itself with regard to having any parts of gang stalking me at any point in time is no actor that I'm going to like walk away with, like, oh, we came to deliver you from gang stalking. Why don't you just come this way with me, Erica Spencer? And I know you were gang stalked. I used to talk. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Okay, so justice is going to be, and this is reasonable with regard to this system of federal group stalking monitoring. Why would you arrive with regard to someone that has already communicated a threat and a purpose and intent to harm me? It's not about what that person or entity thinks or feels. It's absolutely irrelevant. You are a gang stalker. That's how you left my life. And if you are unlawfully in my presence and communicating an unlawful threat, and you're not superior to the law because you work for the state or federal government. You're not. And you're creating an unlawful threat to me, who you have already been documented as targeting me. You are not a friend, and we're not going to become friends. And you are not superior to the law either. And it would be imprudent for the federal government, who is actually providing justice and not sitting around and watching, who doesn't have any personal investment in what I'm going to do with whatever is happening in my future life, which no federal government that's delivering justice should be. Okay, this is speaking to there's a level of just but this is speaking to, again, how personal gang stalking is. And speaking to, there's a level of mental illness with regard to those who are engaging it and sitting around watching it. Obsession is not just born of the gang stalkers at the state level. Obsession is born by those who are at the federal level, who have a relationship identified with Tracy Banks, who have gang stalked. I know them by name. There is a mental illness exhibited through what is ongoing demon possession, monitoring me in the spirit, gang stalking me in the physical, and having any sort of position with government. They remain a threat, and they are not any sort of friend of mine, and the federal government needs to be aware of that. There is nobody that has any sort of specific or special relationship toward me. They represent a threat toward me, and you are communicating a threat being in my presence and doing so. And I would never go anywhere with you, work with you. You did not help me in prosecuting the state. You're not helping now. You weren't helping me certainly when you were having sex with my family member or family members, and with regard to providing sex favors and in exchange for whatever you did with regard to compromising your position in your position of government, with regard to targeting me and doing so as a corrupt official. You weren't helping me then, and there will be no cooperation with us now. This has nothing to do with some sort of obligation that I have to tolerate people that are targeting me. I don't owe any terrorist anything like that. I maintain constitutional rights. And I have a constitutional right to not be gang stalked and not be in the presence of anybody that abused their position in government and at any point in time targeted me, no matter how much they are obsessed. That is speaking to, they're demon possessed. They're monitoring in the spirit as well. They are actively engaging in what is concealing what is the fact that I remain subject to this pattern of conduct in real time. No one is deceived by that or distracted, and you are not coming in to be in my presence, and you're not going to be confused with some sort of hero. I have stated this on more than one occasion. I will share the link with regard to the people of the state, with regard to those who I know by name, and they represent those who are a direct threat to my life and safety, whom I would never personally, voluntarily, or of my own volition and knowledge be in the presence of ever again. Okay, they are at the end, and the entity, it needs to be noted, the entity is still gang stalking, and the federal government is engaged in that pattern of conduct while they're sitting around in real time, aware of my documentation that it is at the same time suppressing. Okay, it is currently 9:08 a.m. RGS is gang stalking with amplified noise, pacing in a gray colored engineer light. These are the demons that are doing so in concert with the gang stalking residents who you see under the fake sun at 10 o'clock in the same exact position at 4:29 p.m. That's where RGS is gang stalking right now with this psychopath in Unit 55. License 5 WUB 715. The entity is indeed engaged in this P.O.C. I will continuously vocalize what I speak to regarding what is sick, what is not Christ-like. Okay, what is inhumane for any person to experience, what I would not be doing as somebody who walks with Christ. I would not be participating in watching someone else suffer and then creating content about what is a very specific and unique. There's no other way. It's nothing other than very tailored because nobody else is prosecuting the state. Nobody else is proving gang stalking. Nobody else is providing this body of evidence. No one else has ever done it. So this is a combination of very particular facts that are speaking to what is very, very unique and specific to me. Okay. Nonetheless, I'm speaking to what is corruption at all points, and the internet and what's going online becomes relevant because federal stalking on the video of the internet is underway, and also because there is suppression of evidence where exposure online is necessary with regard to a prosecution with which again, an ordinary targeted individual that's being kept in a bubble whose evidence is being suppressed, that's occurring with regard to the entity that's determined to commit that murder, that's determined to accomplish that defamation and kidnapping and theft, etc. Okay? In other words, trying to conceal it. To permit it to go on for even one more hour, that is unfathomable to me. And I am always advocating. I'm advocating for myself, but I'm advocating on behalf of the other person. And there is no circumstance where it becomes okay. Where, we did it because of this. And, we're going to give you this. And that's why. No, it's never going to become okay. It's not acceptable. And it is speaking to what is the unclean hands and the incompetence at even the federal level, unfortunately. But this is what I have to report. This is what's happening. It's currently, again, 9:10 a.m. on Wednesday, March 26, 2025, and this is P.O.C.